Hi, everyone. I thought it might help if I went over a few pieces of information for this Modules Connect assignment. You will find you're working in the same chapters as you did last week, but now rather than putting together the entries, you're looking at things from the financial statement perspective. In the end of that module assignment, questions 6 through 9, right, you are preparing the financials, and one of the things that I think is important to think about is what one to do first. We go back to financial accounting. You always did the income statement first, so you knew what the net income was to update your retained earnings balance for your balance sheet. Very similar here, although the other thing that we want to do before we can complete the statement of activities, the income statement equivalent, is go ahead and prepare the functional expense breakdown, right? So you've got this trial balance here to start with, right? These three net asset accounts without donor restriction, with donor restriction for programs, and with donor restriction for the permanent endowment. Since they're in the trial balance, those are beginning balances. So from the end of last year, what we're using to start this year. That's going to become important when you get to the bottom of the statement of activities. And then you have your functional expenses, salaries and wages, occupancy, supplies, and so forth. Right? So in number 1 here, the author tells you what percentages for it's allocated to each of the major categories, the program categories, the management in general, and the fundraising. So I would suggest that you start there with number 7, right? Then move on to number 8, which is the statement of activities, and then come back around at after you finish those to do the balance sheet and finally the statement of cash flow. Right, so because the numbers that you're going to need to finish the statement of financial position are the ending balances in the various net asset accounts. Right. Let me also show you in the textbook here for a second where you can look for examples. Right, so I am on page 68. You should be able to see that here in the left-hand corner, the green. Right, and this is the chapter 14 from the REC textbook. And this is the same setup that you've got in the problem, right? So if we look here, you'll have some of these revenues, maybe not all of them, but these are the ones that you should expect to see. I think you also have some unrealized gains and losses, which normally in for-profit accounting, we have a statement of comprehensive income, and we can put those into another comprehensive income category, but here you can double check in the textbook, but they belong on the statement of activities, right? And then coming down here, you see that when you do the statement of activities, you've got program services. So here they've broken it out by specific program, and you have your management in general and fundraising. So that question 7 will get those totals for you, so you can just drop them into the statement. Oh, here we go. Here's the unrealized loss on investments. You have something similar, I believe, in the question that you're doing. A couple other things to note. In the column for without donor restrictions, you have the contributions that came in that were not restricted, any investment income, anything else that's not restricted. And then this section right here, right, you have the, let's see if I can, right in here. Okay, so we see in this section here in the net assets released from restriction that what we have moving over into the unrestricted column is the amount that we've used of the funds that were formerly restricted. So these two numbers here are going to be the same. In investment income, we'll simply put into each of those columns the amount of the investment income that has come in with donor restrictions. Right, so we've got pluses and minuses up here in our this donor restricted column. What we don't have any of, right, are expenses. So you're never going to see any expenses or losses in the with donor restrictions column. You do see unrealized losses. Those relate in the donor restricted column to investments that are restricted, and the unrealized losses in the other column are from unrestricted investments. And then the other thing you want to pay attention to here is down at the bottom. So like the income statement in for-profit, we have a current period result, which is the change in net assets. And then to tie things out to agree back with our statement of financial position, we take the beginning net assets, which, as I mentioned earlier, are the numbers in your trial balance, and then add or subtract the change in net assets to get the ending net assets. In the problem that you have when you separate the donor restricted net assets, they just have two categories in there: donor restricted permanent and donor restricted other. So you'll just need to break out that number. But these are the totals you need to be able to get your statement of financial position to balance. Back on the bottom of page 67, you can see the statement of financial position in your text. And that should, the asset side is usually not an issue. There aren't very many liabilities in the problem you're looking at either. But this piece down here, the net assets with and without donor restriction, was the main challenge, I would say, that students had last term. So these numbers are the ones that I just showed you from your statement of activities. Okay, I think the problem that you're looking at does split the with donor restrictions into two pieces: the permanent, which stays the same as the prior period, and then the donor restrictions that are have new and have changed for this period. Okay, so if you look at this example, kind of study the relationships between the numbers, and we'll go back to the other statement in a minute to see that these numbers will indeed show up, the 2020 numbers on your statement of activities, 33377 and 415585. Right? So they come from right down here. Okay, so if you remember that, this week's assignment shouldn't be that difficult. Make sure that you do them again in a different order than they're requested. Do 7, 8, 6, and then you can go back and look at the cash flow statement for number 9. The cash flow statement example is here. This cash flow statement, if you look at the first section, is done using the direct method. Nonprofits are one of the only entities that now can use the direct method and not have to do the reconciliation, which is down here, which is essentially the indirect method, right? So the example you have in your text does have you do that reconciliation. So this cash used for operating activities number down here has to be the same as what you came up with up here, right? And just watch your pluses and minuses, especially in the lower section, and kind of think through what's happened as far as whether those asset or those accounts have increased or decreased. So I hope you found this helpful. Be sure to email me if you have any questions. But between studying the examples, hopefully some clarifications that I've made, and the other resources that you have, you can get through this assignment in a relatively short amount of time.